The day my daughter-in-law told me I no longer belonged in my own son's life, it felt like the air left my lungs and never came back. I stood there in her spotless kitchen, hands trembling, realizing some wounds don't bleed, but they still kill you slow. My name is Loretta Mae Johnson, and I've lived long enough to know when a moment splits your life clean in two, before and after. That day was one of them. The kind you replay at night when the house is quiet and your thoughts get loud. The kind that makes you question every sacrifice you ever made with love in your heart and hope in your chest. I raised my son, Marcus, by myself on the south side of Chicago. His daddy left when Marcus was barely walking, and I became mother, father, cheerleader, and shield all in one tired body. I worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, came home smelling like grease and bleach, and still made sure he had homework done and dinner hot. I poured every prayer I had into that boy, and Lord knows, I never once imagined I'd be standing in another woman's kitchen decades later, being told I was no longer welcome in his life. It started on a Tuesday. Ordinary days are always the ones that carry the heaviest heartbreak. I'd driven out to the suburbs to bring Marcus his favorite sweet potato pie, the same recipe my grandmother taught me, passed down like scripture. I hadn't been invited, but I hadn't been told not to come either, or so I thought. When I knocked, my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, opened the door with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. She's polished, always put together, the kind of woman who says, "We'll see," when she means no. I stepped inside, and the house felt cold despite the expensive furniture and warm colors. My spirit knew before my mind did. Something wasn't right. "Marcus isn't home," she said, crossing her arms. "That's okay, baby," I replied softly. "I'll just wait." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something hard settled into her face. "Actually, Loretta, we need to talk." Those 4 words have ended more peace than wars ever did. She gestured for me to sit, but I stayed standing. My knees didn't trust themselves. Vanessa took a breath, the kind people take when they're about to say something they've practiced in the mirror. "I think it's best," she began, "if you take a step back from Marcus's life." I laughed once, short and confused. "Excuse me?" She didn't flinch. "You're too involved. It's not healthy. For him or for us. Us." That word felt like a door slamming shut. I searched her face for kindness, for misunderstanding, for anything that said this wasn't really happening. "I'm his mother," I whispered. "I've always been involved." "And that's the problem," she said flatly. "He has a family now, and honestly, you don't belong in the center of his life anymore." Her words sliced clean and deep. No yelling, no raised voice, just calm cruelty dressed up as concern. I thought of every scraped knee I kissed, every night I sat up waiting for him to come home safe. I thought of the promises I made to God over his sleeping body. And in that moment, I realized my son wasn't there to defend me. He wasn't there at all. I walked out without my pie, without my pride, and without the certainty that love, given freely, always comes back. I cried the whole drive home, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping my heart from shattering completely. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my cheeks were stiff with dried tears, and my chest ached like I'd been carrying a weight meant for 2 lifetimes. My little brick house had never felt so empty. The silence inside greeted me louder than any argument ever could. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and leaned my forehead against the door for a long moment, asking God questions I already knew had no easy answers. "Lord," I whispered, "what did I do wrong raising my own child to forget me?" I expected my phone to buzz. I kept waiting for Marcus's name to light up the screen. "Mama, I'm sorry. Mama, she didn't mean it like that. Mama, come back." But minutes turned into hours, and all I heard was the ticking of the clock above my stove. Each tick felt like another reminder that my son knew where I was and chose silence. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Vanessa's words over and over, hearing the calm certainty in her voice. You don't belong in the center of his life anymore. I wondered when that decision had been made and why nobody thought to tell the woman who gave him life. I remembered the first time Marcus brought Vanessa home. She was polite then, almost overly so, calling me Ms. Johnson, even after I told her to call me Loretta. I noticed the way she'd stiffen when Marcus hugged me too long, or how her smile would tighten when I reminisced about his childhood. I brushed it off back then, told myself I was being sensitive. Lord knows mothers are always accused of that. But lying there in the dark, I saw the signs clear as day. The missed Sunday dinners, the holidays split, fairly. The way Marcus started checking with her before answering my calls. Love doesn't disappear overnight. It erodes quietly, grain by grain, until one day you look around and realize the ground beneath you is gone. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a resolve I hadn't expected. I made my coffee strong and my back straighter. I decided I wasn't going to beg for a place in my own child's life. Still, the ache remained, heavy and persistent, like arthritis in the soul. Around noon, my phone finally rang. "Hey, Mama," Marcus said, his voice cautious, distant. I swallowed hard. "I was at your house yesterday." A pause. Too long. "Vanessa told me." "And?" I asked. My voice steady, though my hands shook. He sighed. "She feels like you don't respect our boundaries." I almost laughed again, but this time it tasted bitter. "What boundaries, Marcus? Loving my son? Showing up with pie?" "It's just, she wants us to have space," he said. "She thinks it's healthier." I closed my eyes, letting his words settle like dust on old furniture. "Do you think that?" I asked softly. Another pause. Longer this time. "I think my marriage comes first." There it was. Not wrong, not cruel on the surface, but the way he said it felt like a door gently closing, quietly locking me out. I realized then that Vanessa hadn't spoken alone. She'd been brave enough to say out loud what my son had already allowed in his heart. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "I raised you to choose your family." He didn't hear the part where I included myself. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the untouched slice of sweet potato pie I'd kept for myself. I took one bite, and the tears finally came back, slow, silent, and unstoppable. I wasn't just losing access to my son, I was grieving a role I thought I'd earned forever. Loneliness doesn't announce itself all at once. It creeps in quietly, settling into the corners of your life until one day you realize it's sitting right beside you at the breakfast table. That's how it felt the weeks after that phone call with Marcus, like the world kept moving while I stayed stuck in a silence I didn't choose. Days passed without a single call from my son. No check-ins. No, "How you holding up, Mama?" I told myself he was busy, building his life, being a husband, but deep down I knew something else was happening. I was being phased out, slowly, deliberately. Like an old piece of furniture nobody wanted to throw away, but didn't want in the living room anymore either. I tried to keep my routine. I went to church every Sunday, sitting in the same pew I'd occupied for years. Folks hugged me, asked about Marcus, asked when I'd be seeing my grandchildren, questions that landed like tiny cuts I had to smile through. "Oh, you know," I'd say, forcing warmth into my voice. "They stay busy." Nobody knew how empty my phone felt in my purse, how quiet my evenings had become. One afternoon, my neighbor and longtime friend, Gloria, stopped by with a pound cake and that knowing look only another seasoned woman can give. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, studying my face. "You losing weight, Loretta," she said gently, "and not the good kind." I sighed, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. I told her everything, Vanessa's words, Marcus's silence, the way my chest ached every night. Gloria listened without interrupting, her lips pressed together, eyes soft but sharp. "Baby," she finally said, reaching for my hand, "some women don't marry men. They marry their mother's absence." That sentence sat heavy between us. "She threatened by you," Gloria continued, "and your son. He choosing peace over truth." I wanted to defend Marcus. I always did. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, tears rolled down my cheeks, hot and unashamed. "I didn't raise him to abandon me," I whispered. "No," Gloria said firmly, "but you raised him to be loved. And sometimes people don't know how to hold that without letting someone else convince them it's a burden." That night, I went home and pulled out an old photo album. Page after page of memories stared back at me. Marcus in his Little League uniform, Marcus on his first day of college, Marcus hugging me after graduation, proof that I hadn't imagined our bond, proof that once upon a time I mattered deeply to him. I found myself wondering when Vanessa started seeing me as competition instead of family. Was it the way Marcus still called me for advice, or the fact that I knew his moods better than anyone? Some women don't want to join a family. They want to replace it. A few days later, I finally decided to visit Marcus again. Not unannounced this time. I called first. "Maybe another time, Mama," he said quickly. "Vanessa's not feeling well." That was the third another time in 2 weeks. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at the wall, something inside me hardening. I realized I was shrinking myself to fit into a space they controlled. I was waiting to be allowed to love my own child. That's when the anger came, not loud or explosive, but quiet and steady, the kind that makes you reassess everything. I began to ask myself questions I'd avoided before. Why was I the only one making compromises? Why was my pain always the price of their comfort? Late that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "We need to set clearer boundaries going forward. Please respect our wishes." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. No greeting, no kindness, just rules. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about space anymore. This was about erasing me. But I wasn't ready to disappear quietly. I sat there holding my phone like it had just spoken a curse over my life, my thumb hovering above the screen, unsure whether silence or truth would hurt more. That message from Vanessa wasn't just words. It was a declaration of war dressed up as boundaries. I didn't reply right away. I needed to breathe, to pray, to keep myself from saying something sharp enough to shatter whatever fragile thread still connected me to my son. Instead, I placed the phone face down on the coffee table and walked into my bedroom, where Marcus's childhood trophies still lined the top shelf of my closet. I hadn't moved them in years. Touching them now felt like touching a past that was slipping away without my consent. That night, I dreamed of holding Marcus as a baby. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, trusting me completely. I woke up with tears soaking my pillow, my heart pounding like it had lost its rhythm. Dreams have a way of reminding you who you were before the world told you to let go. The next morning, I decided I wasn't going to be bullied out of my own story. I typed back carefully, every word chosen like glass. "I love my son. I will always respect him, but I will not pretend I don't exist." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then nothing. A week passed, then 2. No calls, no visits, just absence. And absence has a sound, low, constant, like a hum you can't turn off. I tried to fill the days. I volunteered at the community center, started attending a Bible study on Tuesday nights, even joined a walking group for seniors at the park. Folks smiled. They laughed. Life kept offering me places to belong, but none of them were my son. Then came Sunday dinner at church, a potluck meant to celebrate family. I almost didn't go. The word family felt too raw, but something in me said hiding would only prove I was shrinking. So I went carrying a pan of baked chicken and my dignity like they were both fragile. Halfway through the meal, I heard a familiar laugh, Marcus's laugh. I turned slowly, my heart leaping before my pride could stop it. There he was, standing beside Vanessa near the dessert table. She looked radiant. He looked nervous. Our eyes met, and for a split second, the boy I raised was right there. Then Vanessa placed her hand firmly on his arm, and his shoulders stiffened. They didn't come over. I sat frozen, smiling politely as folks chatted around me, while my son avoided my gaze like I was a stranger. Something broke open in my chest right there in that fellowship hall. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was final. After church, Marcus caught up to me in the parking lot. "Mama," he said, breathless, "I meant to say hi." I looked at him, really looked, but you didn't. He rubbed his neck. Vanessa's still adjusting. I let out a slow breath. "And when do I get to adjust, Marcus?" He had no answer. That night, I went home and wrote him a letter. Not a text, not a voicemail, a letter. I told him how proud I was of the man he'd become, and how deeply hurt I was by the distance he allowed. I told him love shouldn't require silence, and boundaries shouldn't erase history. I mailed it the next morning, my hand steady for the first time in weeks. For the first time. I wasn't chasing his attention. I was standing in my truth, and whatever came next, I would face it head on. The letter sat in Marcus's mailbox longer than it ever sat in my heart, but the waiting nearly unraveled me. Every day after I mailed it, I jumped at the sound of my phone, my nerves stretched thin like old elastic. When you speak your truth late in life, you already know there may be consequences, but knowing doesn't make the waiting any easier. 3 days passed, then 4. By the end of the week, my courage started to feel foolish. I replayed every sentence I'd written, wondering if I'd said too much or not enough. I prayed over that letter like it was a living thing. Lord, let him read it with the eyes of the boy I raised, not the fear of the man he's become. On the 7th day, my phone rang. "Hi, Mama," Marcus said. His voice was low, cautious, like he was standing at the edge of something deep. I sat down slowly. "You read my letter?" "Yes," he replied. A pause. Vanessa read it too. That one sentence told me everything I needed to know, and still, I asked, "And?" He sighed. "She feels attacked." I closed my eyes. Of course she did. "Marcus," I said gently, "my pain is not an attack." "I know," he said quickly. "I told her that, but she says you're trying to guilt me." A familiar ache spread through my chest. "I'm trying to reach you." Silence filled the space between us. I could hear his breathing, heavy and conflicted. "She thinks your presence confuses my priorities." I felt something shift inside me then, not anger, not sadness, but clarity. "Baby," I said softly, "if loving your mother confuses your priorities, something is already broken." He didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I don't want to lose my marriage." "And I don't want to lose my son," I replied. "But here we are." We ended the call politely. No resolution, no promises, just two people standing on opposite sides of a widening gap. I placed the phone down and sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. I looked older than I remembered, not from age, but from carrying pain that wasn't mine alone. That night, I dreamed again. This time, Marcus was grown, standing at my door, knocking but never entering. I woke up with my heart racing, sweat on my brow, and a knowing deep in my bones. Something was coming. A few days later, Vanessa called me directly for the first time since that day in her kitchen. "Loretta," she said, cool and composed, "we need to be clear moving forward." I braced myself. "I'm listening." "We don't want conflict," she continued, "but we need distance. Visits need to be planned. Calls should go through Marcus, and certain topics, our marriage, our choices, are off limits." I felt my spine straighten. You're giving me rules for loving my child? For respecting our household, she corrected. I took a breath. Vanessa, I am not your enemy. That's not how it feels, she said. Well, I replied calmly, feelings don't erase facts. I gave birth to that man. I raised him, and I will not be managed like a problem to be contained. She went quiet, then sharply. This is exactly why boundaries are necessary. When the call ended, my hands were shaking, but my voice hadn't, and that mattered. For the first time, I realized something powerful. I was no longer afraid of losing access. I was afraid of losing myself, trying to earn it. I walked into my bedroom, opened my journal, and wrote one line in big, bold letters. I will not beg to belong where I gave life. Whatever came next would test me, but I was done bending until I broke. The first holiday without my son felt like a death nobody acknowledged, and I woke up that morning with my chest already aching. Thanksgiving had always been our day. Marcus helping me baste the turkey, sneaking bites before Grace, laughing at my stories like he hadn't heard them 100 times before. That year, the house was quiet and the silence felt intentional. I stood in my kitchen early, sunlight creeping through the blinds, staring at a turkey still frozen solid in the sink. I hadn't canceled Thanksgiving. I'd prepared for it out of habit, out of hope, out of stubborn faith that things could still change. But the night before, Marcus had sent a short text. We'll be at Vanessa's parents' this year. Maybe next time. Maybe next time. Those words sat heavier than rejection. They carried no promise, no apology, just distance wrapped in politeness. I cooked anyway. I seasoned that bird the same way I always did, my hands moving on muscle memory while my heart drifted between past and present. I set the table for one, then hesitated and added a second place setting before removing it again. I laughed softly at myself, a sad little sound. Old habits die hard when love has nowhere to go. Around noon, my sister Evelyn called. You all right? She asked, cutting straight to the truth. I'm breathing, I replied. Some days, that's the victory. She came over an hour later with a bottle of sparkling cider and her arms wide open. We hugged long and tight, the kind of hug that doesn't ask questions because it already knows the answers. He choosing her family over you, Evelyn said plainly as we sat down. He choosing peace, I corrected, though even I didn't fully believe it anymore. No, she said gently. He choosing quiet. That distinction hit me hard. Midway through dinner, my phone buzzed, a picture message. It was Marcus, him and Vanessa smiling at a crowded table surrounded by her relatives. The caption read, Happy Thanksgiving, Mama, love you. I stared at that photo for a long time. Love you. 2 words that used to mean presence, now reduced to pixels and obligation. I replied with a heart emoji because I didn't trust my words. That night, after Evelyn left, I sat alone with leftovers I barely touched. I thought about old age, the kind nobody warns you about. Not the wrinkles or the slower steps, but the way people assume you need less because you're older. Less time, less affection, less importance. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Marcus. Mama Vanessa thinks it might be best if we skip Christmas this year too, just until things settle. I didn't cry this time. I didn't argue. I just sat there, listening to his voice crack under the weight of a decision he wasn't brave enough to own. That was the moment something finally shifted. I realized I'd been waiting for him to choose me again when I should have been choosing myself all along. I went to the mirror and looked at the woman staring back. She looked tired, but she also looked strong. A woman who had survived abandonment once before and would survive it again, even if it came from her own child. I picked up my phone and sent Marcus a message. I love you. I'll always be your mother, but I won't keep reaching where I'm not wanted. When you're ready to meet me halfway, I'll be here. My hands didn't shake when I sent it. That evening, I turned on some old gospel music, poured myself a glass of cider, and sat by the window watching the sun go down. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel like punishment. It felt like preparation. The quiet that followed my message to Marcus was different. It wasn't heavy anymore, but it was watchful, like the calm before a truth finally shows its face. Days passed without a response, and for once I didn't count them. I woke up, made my bed, said my prayers, and moved through my hours with a dignity I'd forgotten I still possessed. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. My first thought was that maybe it was a package, but when I opened the door, there stood Vanessa, alone. No Marcus, no warning, just her wrapped in a long coat, lips pressed tight, eyes sharp with purpose. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt thick, like we were standing in a room full of unspoken accusations. "May I come in?" she asked, already stepping forward. I held the door open wider. "You already are." She glanced around my living room as she walked in, taking in the modest furniture, the family photos, the quiet warmth of a life fully lived. Something flickered across her face. Curiosity, maybe discomfort, but she masked it quickly. "I'll be direct," she said, sitting stiffly on the edge of my couch. "Marcus has been distant lately. He's distracted." I raised an eyebrow. "And you think that's my doing?" "I think," she replied carefully, "that your message put ideas in his head." I let out a slow breath. "All I did was tell the truth." She crossed her legs. "Your truth makes him feel torn." "No," I corrected softly. "His silence does." Her jaw tightened. "You don't understand what it's like to build a marriage." I almost laughed, but I held it back. "Baby," I said gently, "I built a child alone. Don't tell me about sacrifice." That landed. She shifted in her seat, her confidence wobbling for just a second. "He talks about you more now," she admitted, "about how things used to be." "And that scares you," I said, not unkindly. She looked away. "I don't want to lose him." The honesty surprised me. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. "Neither do I. But love isn't a competition unless someone turns it into one." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something beneath the control. Fear. Real fear. The kind that makes people build walls instead of bridges. "He listens to you," she said quietly. "More than he listens to me." I shook my head. "He listens to himself when he talks to me. That's the difference." We sat in silence, the weight of generations between us. Then she stood abruptly. "I think we need more space." I stood too, my voice calm but firm. "Vanessa, space is fine. Erasure is not." She didn't respond. She simply nodded once and walked out, leaving my door closing softly behind her. That night, my phone rang. "Mama," Marcus said. His voice strained. "Vanessa came to see you." "Yes," I replied. "She said you were strong," he said, almost surprised. I smiled sadly. "I've always been." He hesitated. "I don't know how to fix this." I leaned back in my chair, looking up at the ceiling. Sometimes fixing isn't the answer. Sometimes truth just needs time. After we hung up, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not yet, but certainty. Whatever choices my son made next would reveal who he was becoming. And whatever happened, I knew one thing for sure. I would not disappear to make anyone else comfortable. I knew something had shifted the moment Marcus started calling again. Not often, not freely, but enough to remind me I still lived somewhere in his conscience. It wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was movement. And movement can be dangerous when you don't know which direction it's headed. The first call came late one evening. "Mama," he said, voice low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "You busy?" I looked around my quiet living room, the lamp casting soft shadows on walls that had held more tears than laughter lately. "For you, never." He exhaled, and I could hear the weight in it. "Things are tense." I didn't ask where. I didn't need to. Tension tells the truth before people do, I said gently. He chuckled softly, then grew quiet. Vanessa thinks I'm pulling away. And do you? I asked. Another pause. I think I'm waking up. Those words startled me more than any argument could have. Waking up meant seeing. Seeing meant choosing. And choices, real ones, always come with consequences. Over the next few weeks, Marcus called more regularly, sometimes just to talk about work, sometimes to ask about my health. Once he asked me how I'd been really doing. That question alone felt like a small miracle. But each call had an invisible ceiling. He never mentioned visiting, never mentioned holidays, and he never spoke freely, as if every word had to be approved by someone not on the line. Then one afternoon, Gloria stopped by again, her purse swinging like she had news. You hear? She asked, barely inside the door. Hear what? I replied, already bracing myself. Your son and his wife been arguing. Folks at church talking. I sighed, closing my eyes. I hated being the topic of whispered concern. I don't want to be the reason they fall apart. Gloria fixed me with a look. Baby, if truth shakes a foundation, it was already cracked. That night, Marcus called me in tears. Real tears. The kind he hadn't shed since his father left. I don't know who I'm supposed to be, he confessed. A good husband or a good son. I felt my heart break and strengthen at the same time. You don't have to choose between roles, Marcus, I said softly. You just have to choose honesty. But she says you'll always come first, he said, voice shaking. I swallowed hard. That's not what I want. I want respect. I want room to exist without being treated like a threat. He was quiet for a long moment. I should have protected you. That sentence cut deeper than Vanessa's ever did, because it meant he knew. And knowing comes with responsibility. A few days later, he showed up at my door unannounced. I opened it, and there he stood. Older, tired, eyes heavy with regret. I didn't speak. I just opened my arms. He held me like he used to when he was little, face buried in my shoulder. I'm sorry, Mama, he whispered. I forgot where I came from. I didn't say, I forgive you. Not yet. Some wounds need more than words. We sat and talked for hours. He admitted things he'd never said out loud, how small he'd felt trying to keep everyone happy, how afraid he was of losing his marriage, and how close he'd come to losing himself. When he left, my house felt warmer than it had in months, but I knew better than to confuse warmth with healing, because love returning doesn't always mean peace is coming with it. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a bigger storm. The storm didn't arrive loud or fast. It rolled in slow, dark, and unavoidable, like a truth nobody wanted to name out loud. After Marcus left my house that night, I stood at the window long after his taillights disappeared, knowing deep in my spirit that what we'd started couldn't be undone. 2 days later, Vanessa called. This time, she didn't pretend to be polite. I know he came to see you, she said, skipping any greeting. Yes, I replied calmly. He's my son. You're interfering, she snapped. You're turning him against me. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, but my voice stayed steady. I didn't pull him anywhere. I stood still. He walked. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You always talk like you're innocent. I took a breath. And you talk like love is something that can be controlled. Silence. Then coldly, you've crossed a line, Loretta. I looked around my home, my safe place, my history, my solitude. The only line crossed, I said, was the one where you decided I no longer mattered. She hung up on me. That night, Marcus called again, panicked. She says she can't do this anymore. My heart clenched. Do what? Compete, he said quietly. I closed my eyes. Marcus, this was never a competition. But it feels like one to her, he insisted. And what does it feel like to you? I asked. He didn't answer. That silence told me more than words ever could. Days later, Marcus asked if he could stay with me for a few nights, to think. I hesitated, not because I didn't want him, but because I knew what it meant. A grown man coming back to his mother's house isn't just thinking, it's retreating. When he arrived with a small overnight bag, his shoulders sagged like he'd been carrying guilt instead of clothes. I didn't ask questions. I made dinner. I let him sleep in his old room. Some things don't need permission. On the third night, he sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands clasped, eyes red. "She says if I don't cut you off completely, she's leaving," he said. The room went quiet. Even the clock seemed to hold its breath. "And what did you say?" I asked softly. He looked up at me, tears spilling freely now. I told her I can't. My heart shattered and soared all at once, but relief didn't come, because love doesn't celebrate ultimatums. "She packed a bag," he continued. "She says I chose you." I reached across the table and took his hands. "No, baby, you chose yourself." He sobbed then, shoulders shaking, grief pouring out of him like poison finally released. I held him like I used to when nightmares woke him up as a child. But this time, the nightmare was real. The next morning, Vanessa showed up at my door. Her eyes were swollen, her voice was raw. "I want my husband back." I studied her carefully, not with anger, but with clarity. "Then you have to stop trying to erase his past to secure his future." She shook her head. "I don't know how." I nodded slowly. "That's the truth we should have started with." She left without another word. Marcus stayed another week, then another. And with each passing day, I worried. Not about losing him again, but about what it would cost him to keep standing up. Because sometimes, choosing truth means losing the life you thought you were building. And the hardest lessons don't come without casualties. The house changed once Marcus moved in, even temporarily. His presence filled the rooms with echoes of the past and tension about the future. I heard him pacing at night, restless and uncertain, a grown man walking the same floors he once ran across in socks, and every step reminded me that love doesn't stop being complicated just because it comes home. One evening, while I folded laundry in the living room, Marcus sat across from me, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. "Mama," he said quietly, "what if I ruined everything?" I folded a towel carefully before answering. "Baby, truth doesn't ruin things. It reveals them." He nodded, but I could see the guilt digging into him. "She keeps texting, saying she feels abandoned, that I chose you over her." I met his eyes. "And what do you feel?" He swallowed. "I feel like I've been lying to myself for a long time." That answer hurt, but it also healed something in me, because it meant he was finally seeing clearly. A few days later, Marcus told me he and Vanessa had agreed to meet with a counselor. "She says she'll try," he said, cautious but hopeful. I wanted to believe that was enough. I really did. The first session left him drained. He came home silent, retreating to his room like a teenager after a bad report card. Later that night, he knocked on my door. "She told the counselor you control me," he said, voice hollow. I felt my chest tighten. "And what did you say?" "That it wasn't true," he replied. But I could tell. She believes it. I reached for his hand. Beliefs formed from fear don't disappear overnight. The second session was worse. Vanessa refused to speak to me at all, even indirectly. She told Marcus she needed a break from his mother's influence. When he repeated those words to me, I felt something finally snap. I sat him down at the kitchen table, just like I used to when he was young. "Marcus," I said firmly, "listen to me. I love you. But if you're going to heal your marriage, it cannot happen under my roof." He looked shocked. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to grow," I corrected. "Not hide." Tears filled his eyes. "I don't want to lose you again." "You won't," I said, touching his cheek. but you need to stand on your own feet to choose anything, her or me, with integrity." The next morning, he packed his things. Before he left, he hugged me tight. "Thank you for not letting me disappear," he whispered. After he drove away, the house fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. I'd done my job as a mother not by holding on, but by letting go with wisdom. Weeks passed. Updates came sparingly. Counseling continued. Some days sounded hopeful. Others felt bleak. Then one afternoon, Marcus called. "She moved out," he said quietly. "Says she needs time." I closed my eyes. "And what do you need?" he exhaled. "To stop pretending." That night, I lit a candle and prayed. Not for reconciliation, not for victory, but for truth to finish its work. Because love without honesty is just fear wearing a mask. And whatever the outcome, I knew one thing for certain. I had reclaimed my place, not by force, but by refusing to disappear. The first morning after Vanessa moved out, the house felt different. Not just quieter, but lighter, like a storm had passed without taking the trees. I walked through the rooms slowly, my fingers brushing over surfaces I'd long neglected, noticing the dust, the small cracks in the walls, the warmth of sunlight spilling across the floor. It was my home again, but not just mine. It was a house holding space for the truth I had fought for all these months. I heard Marcus stirring in the guest room and called out softly, "Morning, baby." He appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, eyes heavy with last night's tears and yesterday's decisions. For a moment, we just stood there, measuring each other, feeling the weight of what had shifted without words. He started, voice wavering. Then he stopped. His mouth opened and closed, like he was trying to find the courage. I smiled gently. "Go on." "I don't know where to start," he admitted. "I feel free, but guilty. And I don't know how to fix what's broken." I walked over and placed my hand on his shoulder. "Baby, sometimes fixing doesn't mean making things perfect. It means being honest with yourself and everyone around you." He nodded slowly. "I lied to you, and I lied to myself. I thought keeping peace meant keeping quiet, letting her push me away from you. But it only built walls I didn't realize I'd made." I squeezed his shoulder. "You're realizing it now. That's what matters. Wounds don't heal in a single day, but awareness is the first stitch." He took a deep breath. "She left. She says she needs time. And I don't know what to do. I want to fix my marriage, but I can't go back to being someone I'm not. I can't pretend she's the only one who matters. Mama, you matter too." My throat tightened, tears threatening to spill. "Baby." I never wanted to compete. I just wanted a place at the table. You were my child, my heart. You were always enough. He swallowed hard. "And you still are." We sat in silence for a while, just listening to each other's breathing, feeling the presence of a bond that had been tested and bent but never broken. For the first time in months, I felt the warmth of being a mother without fear, without rules being forced upon me, without my love being framed as a threat. Later that evening, Marcus helped me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, just like when he was a boy. We laughed quietly over little mishaps, the kind only mothers and sons share. And while Vanessa's absence was undeniable, it also revealed something I'd almost forgotten: the joy of having my son's company without manipulation, without tension, without a third voice dictating love's terms. As we sat down to eat, Marcus looked at me and said softly, "Mama, thank you for not disappearing, for not giving up on me, for letting me come back to myself." I smiled, my eyes filling with tears I didn't hide this time. "You'll always find your way back, baby, but sometimes you need someone to hold the light until you can see it on your own." That night, after he went to his room, I sat by the window with my journal and wrote, "Some battles are not won by force, but by refusing to disappear. Love is not ownership. its truth, patience, and presence. Outside, the wind whispered softly, carrying with it a sense of renewal I hadn't felt in months. And while the road ahead with Marcus and Vanessa would be uncertain, I felt rooted in something unshakable, the certainty of my worth, my voice, and my place in my son's life. For the first time in what felt like forever, I slept without dread pressing on my chest. The days after Vanessa left were strange in their calmness. I woke up to a house that didn't hum with tension or whispered resentments. Instead, it felt alive in a quiet way, as if every corner of my home had been holding its breath, waiting for the storm to pass. And now it had, or at least I hoped it had. Marcus began spending more time with me, but not in the desperate, guilty way he had months before. He helped with groceries, washed dishes without being asked, and even asked for my advice about things I never thought I'd be consulted on again. It was subtle, ordinary. But in that ordinariness, I found my heart mending piece by piece. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch drinking iced tea, Marcus leaned back in his chair, squinting against the sunlight. "Mama," he said after a long pause, "I don't think I realized how much I was letting fear control me. Fear of her, fear of conflict, fear of disappointing people, but I was losing myself." I nodded slowly. Fear has a way of doing that. It's why some women try to erase the past instead of understanding it. But baby, hiding behind fear doesn't protect anything. It just isolates everyone involved. He looked at me, his eyes softening, vulnerable. "I don't want to hurt anyone. I especially don't want to hurt you." "You won't," I said, my voice gentle but steady. "You won't as long as you remember that love isn't a thing to guard or manage. It's a choice you make every day, and it can't be forced by fear or resentment." He let that sink in, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Then he looked up, his expression heavy. "I think I need to be honest with her, really honest, and maybe that means she walks away. But I can't live in silence anymore." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. And that's exactly the kind of man I raised. Courage isn't the absence of fear, baby. It's what you do when fear knocks on your door and you refuse to let it in. That evening, Marcus sat in his old room, writing in a notebook. I didn't interrupt. I made tea for both of us and brought it in, setting the mugs on the nightstand. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't know if she'll come back, but I do know that I've never felt more myself than I do right now." I smiled, letting the warmth of those words settle into my chest. And that's all that matters, baby. You can't live in anyone else's shadow and expect to grow. Life will always test you, but your roots, your truth, will always bring you back. Later that night, as I closed my eyes, I realized that Vanessa's departure had given me something I hadn't expected: clarity. I could love my son fiercely without fear, without judgment, without compromise of my own dignity. And Marcus, for the first time in years, could see himself outside of someone else's control. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't be. Love, family, marriage, these are never simple. But it was real. And real was enough for now. I sat by the window, writing in my journal once more. Sometimes we have to let people walk away to see who they truly are and who we truly are to them. Love is not lost when it's true. It simply finds its proper place. And as I closed my journal, I realized I was finally breathing again. Not just air, but life. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I first noticed the change in Marcus. Not in a dramatic way, no sudden speeches or proclamations, but in the small, subtle ways that only a mother could recognize. He lingered longer over breakfast, asked me how I slept, and even offered to help with my garden. These little gestures carried weight, proof that he was no longer running from me, or from himself. I watched him carefully, remembering the boy he once was, the young man he had become, and the grown man now finding his way back into honesty. I felt pride, yes, but also a deep tenderness, like my heart had been broken and stitched back together, stronger for every tear. Later that afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it cautiously, wondering if it was another neighbor or a delivery. But there she was, Vanessa. Alone, her coat buttoned tightly, hands fidgeting. I felt the old tension stir in my chest, but I stood tall, ready to face her without fear. "Loretta," she said softly. No anger, no accusation, just a quiet, almost hesitant greeting. I nodded. "Vanessa." There was a pause, the kind that stretches between two people who carry months of unsaid words. Finally she spoke. I needed to see you, to understand, to figure out what all of this means." I gestured for her to come in. "Sit," I said gently, guiding her to the couch. "There's a lot to unpack, but we can start with the truth." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you, or him, but I was afraid that if you stayed close, I'd lose my place in his life." I nodded, letting her words hang in the air. Fear makes people act in ways they'd never choose if they felt safe. But fear is not a weapon. It's a signal. And sometimes that signal tells us to examine ourselves, not others. She let out a shaky laugh. I didn't understand that. I thought I was protecting him, but I was only protecting my own ego. "Recognizing that is the first step," I said, my voice calm. "You can't rewrite the past, Vanessa, but you can choose to move forward differently." We talked for hours, not as adversaries, but as women trying to navigate love and loyalty. I shared memories of Marcus as a child, lessons I'd learned raising him alone, and fears I had for him now. She listened, really listened. At one point, she said, "I see now. You never tried to take him from me. You only ever wanted to be part of his life." And I let my insecurities blind me. I reached across the coffee table, taking her hands in mine. Love doesn't have to be a competition. There's room for all kinds of love, mother, wife, and child, but it has to be rooted in respect and honesty. By the time she left, the tension between us had softened, replaced with a fragile understanding. It wasn't a miracle fix, it wasn't perfect, but it was the beginning of something new, something that could grow into coexistence instead of conflict. That night, Marcus came to my room. "She came by," he said quietly, and it felt different. I smiled, pulling him into a hug. "It takes courage to face truth, baby, and courage is what will build a future, not fear or control." As I watched him walk back to his room, I realized that the real work wasn't over, not by a long shot, but at least now, we were walking together instead of apart. Some battles are won quietly, in hearts and minds, long before they appear in actions. And sometimes the greatest victories come not from forcing change, but from patiently allowing truth to reveal itself. The weeks that followed Vanessa's visit were strange, yet calming. The house no longer carried the weight of silent arguments or unspoken resentment. Instead, it hummed with small, deliberate gestures of reconciliation. Marcus and I shared mornings over coffee, afternoons tending the garden, and evenings talking quietly on the porch, letting the sky darken around us while we laughed or simply sat together. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, when Marcus came in with a hesitant look. "Mama," he said, his voice low, "I need your advice." I turned to him with a smile, wiping my hands on a towel. "Of course, baby. What's going on?" He hesitated. "I don't know how to approach Vanessa. About us, about everything. I don't want to fight, but I also can't ignore how I feel." I set down the knife and leaned against the counter. "You have to speak from your heart, Marcus. Not from fear, not from guilt. Just honesty. She may not like it, but if she truly loves you, she'll listen." He nodded slowly. And what if she doesn't? Then I said something I'd learned over decades of motherhood, prayer, and life. Then, baby, you know you've done your part. You can't force someone to meet you in truth. You can only offer it. That night, Marcus called her. I didn't hear the words, only the silence of my own breath and the occasional soft exhale through the phone. When he finally hung up, he was quiet, thoughtful, and I could tell he had bared his heart. She listened, he said softly. Not everything, but she heard me. And I think she's starting to understand. Days later, Vanessa sent a message. Not long, not dramatic, just a simple acknowledgement. Thank you for your patience. I smiled, knowing the path to trust and coexistence wouldn't be fast. It never is, but each small step mattered more than words could convey. One afternoon, I found myself flipping through a photo album, pictures of Marcus as a boy, then a teenager, then the young man he had become. All reminded me that the bond we shared wasn't just about proximity. It was about years of love, lessons, and life shared. Marcus came up behind me and looked over my shoulder. You really saved me, Mama, he said quietly. Not by forcing me to choose, but by letting me see the truth for myself. I kissed the top of his head. Baby, I just stayed. That's all I ever did. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just being there when the world tells you to walk away. He smiled, eyes shining. I think I'm finally ready to make things right, with her and with you. I felt my chest tighten, not from pain, but from pride. My son was reclaiming his life, his choices, and his honesty, and I had survived the months of loneliness, betrayal, and fear that had threatened to erode our bond. That night, I lit a candle, as I often did when reflecting. I whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for my son, but for myself, for the strength to endure, the wisdom to know when to let go, and the love that had never wavered, even when the world tried to tell me it no longer belonged. Sometimes, family is about holding on. Sometimes, it's about letting go. And sometimes, it's about doing both, gracefully, with truth as your guide. It was a crisp morning in early December when Marcus came into the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. He handed me one with a small, shy smile. Mama, he said, I think she's ready to talk. Properly. No walls, no fear. I took the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my hands, and nodded. Then let her come. The truth is always ready, baby, if you're brave enough to meet it. When Vanessa arrived later that afternoon, the air felt different, lighter, though tentative. She avoided the sharp angles of conflict, and instead we sat together at the kitchen table. A truce forming in silence before a single word was spoken. I wanted to apologize, Vanessa began, her hands clasped tightly, for how I treated you, for trying to control everything between Marcus and me. I was afraid, and I let it dictate my actions. I watched her closely, studying the small tremble in her voice, the shame hidden beneath layers of pride. Vanessa, I said softly, fear can make us act like enemies to the very people we love, but acknowledging it is the first step toward real change. She nodded, swallowing hard. I've been selfish, and I see now how much of my fear hurt both of you. I leaned forward, my hand brushing over hers. It's never too late to start over, but understanding that love doesn't compete, it shares, makes all the difference. Marcus, who had been standing quietly in the corner, came forward and wrapped an arm around both of us. Mama Vanessa, this is what I wanted all along. Not sides, not arguments, just honesty and respect. Vanessa looked at him, then at me, tears glimmering in her eyes. I want that too, she whispered. For the first time in months, the house felt whole again. Not perfect, but alive, breathing, capable of love without fear. We spent hours talking, remembering what mattered most, Not who controlled whom, but the family we were meant to protect and cherish. Later, as Vanessa left to return to her apartment, she turned to me and said quietly, "Thank you, Loretta, for not disappearing, for letting him find himself without being erased." I smiled, my heart full yet tender. Baby, that's what mothers do. We stay even when it's hard. We guide, we love, and sometimes we step back so love can grow on its own. Marcus lingered for a moment by the door. "Mama, I think things are going to be okay now. Really okay." I nodded, placing a hand over his heart. "It will be, baby, because you've learned to love honestly, and that's the strongest foundation anyone can have." That evening, I sat by the window, sipping tea and reflecting on the months of heartache, fear, and eventual understanding. I realized that the hardest lessons aren't about winning or losing. They're about endurance, patience, and knowing your own worth. I wrote in my journal, "Love cannot be forced, controlled, or dictated. It must be nurtured with honesty, patience, and courage. And sometimes the bravest act is simply to stay and believe in its power." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I slept without dread pressing on my chest, without fear whispering that my place in my son's life could be taken away. Because love, when rooted in truth, cannot be erased. The first snowfall of the season came quietly, dusting my little brick house and the neighborhood in soft white. I watched from my window, a warm cup of tea in hand, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. The battles, the tears, the sleepless nights, they had all led to this fragile, beautiful equilibrium. Marcus knocked on my door that afternoon. When I opened it, he was smiling, not nervously, not cautiously, but genuinely. "Mama," he said, "come see what I've been working on." Curious, I followed him to the backyard. There, in the midst of freshly fallen snow, he had built a small snowman, a little crooked and charming. Beside it, Vanessa was kneeling, carefully placing a scarf around its neck. She looked up as I approached and gave me a tentative smile. "I wanted you to see," Marcus said softly, taking my hand. "We're trying, really trying, to build something together, without fear, without erasing the past." I watched them for a long moment, the childlike joy in their actions reflecting a new beginning. I realized then that love is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes painfully slow, but it can also be tender, forgiving, and transformative. Vanessa's voice was quiet but sincere. "Thank you for not disappearing, Loretta, for giving Marcus and me a chance to see what family really means." I nodded, letting the warmth of that acknowledgement fill the cold winter air. "Baby," I said, touching her arm gently, "love is never a threat. It's a gift, and it's big enough to hold all of us if we let it." Marcus pulled me close, hugging me tight. "Mama, I'm so sorry for everything, for letting her fear control me, for not standing up sooner, for everything." I hugged him back, feeling the tension of the past months melt into something lighter, almost like hope. "Baby, the past is done. What matters now is the love we choose to nurture, every day, without fear." That night, I sat by the window again, watching the snow swirl around the streetlights, thinking about the months of heartache, the battles fought quietly in kitchens, bedrooms, and phone calls. I thought about Vanessa's fear, Marcus's confusion, and my own doubts, and I realized that all of it, every painful, gut-wrenching moment, had led to clarity, to understanding, to family reclaimed, not through control, but through courage and truth. I poured myself another cup of tea and whispered a prayer. "Thank you, Lord, for teaching us patience, for showing us the strength in standing firm, the power of honesty, and the grace in forgiveness. May we never forget that love is bigger than fear, bigger than pride, and bigger than any wall we build to protect ourselves." As I closed my eyes that night, I felt the warmth of the house, the presence of my son nearby, and a fragile, hopeful truce with Vanessa. I knew the road ahead would have bumps and missteps, but for the first time in a long while, I felt confident, not because I could control their choices, but because I had reclaimed my own. Love, I realized, isn't about keeping people close by force. It's about standing in your truth, showing up with patience and courage, and trusting that those who matter will walk beside you, not ahead, not behind, but right there, in the warmth of honesty and the light of family. And in that still, snowy night, I finally understood. Even after betrayal, heartbreak, and fear, love endures. It always has, and it always will.